Imagine this. You are a leader. You're checking off boxes. You're hitting your targets. And then before you turn out the light in the office, you think to yourself deep down, something feels like it's missing. Maybe it's the spark you used to have. Maybe it's alignment with everything that's going on. Ultimately, it's about wholeness. Generative wholeness is a mindset shift. Instead of seeing leadership as only transactional, hitting targets and solving problems, of course, we need to do that. Generative wholeness sees leadership as transformational. Yes, performing and unlocking potential. And we do that by fostering an environment for creativity where people feel welcome and invited to integrate the whole self. Of course, you recruited this wonderful team. Wouldn't you want them to bring their whole self? Let's take Mark, for example. He was a high-achieving executive who had one problem after his promotion. He couldn't keep his team. Turnover was high, morale was low, and even with great strategies in place, something wasn't working. They were not producing results the way he was used to. It wasn't until Mark embraced generative wholeness that things began to change. He learned that instead of leading from control, he could lead through connection. Instead of focusing just on results, he focused on the relationships, got to know his team, and realized they were capable of so much more in producing results than he was giving them credit for. The shift, his team engaged, they were collaborative, and most important, they were invested together toward a shared purpose. Today's workforce is changing very fast, not just in age, but also this next two generations are much more digital natives than the ones that came before. Employees are seeking purpose. They want adaptability, and they want leaders who will be human with them. For some time now, Gallup's been reporting that 75% of employees leave jobs due to poor leadership. And with this younger generation prioritizing purpose-driven work, they are expecting their leaders to evolve to meet that new expectation. Let's take Sarah for an example. She is a coach, and she learned something about generative wholeness the hard way. She prided herself on having all the answers as the key to her success in her corporate professional life. But something felt off. She could tell that her team wasn't experiencing the deep shifts that she knew were possible. And through generative coaching, she began to realize her job wasn't to fix, direct, advise, and guide. It was to invite her team members to realize they had more capability and to find their own answers. She shifted from directive coaching to a creative process, peer-to-peer, adult-to-adult, empowering her team members and now her clients to realize they had the breakthrough there all the time and support them to take the risk to pursue it. So, what is it that generative wholeness asks of each of us as leaders? I think there's three key shifts that happen. One is to embrace sovereignty. Big word, I know. Now let's break it down to its simple parts. Sov means self. Reinti is the big word for reign or rule, self-ruling at the end of the day. And of course, every day when we lead from self-awareness, then we have the clarity about the influence and impact we're having. And ultimately, the confidence to leave space for others to also contribute because we're listening to learn with them. Engage with tension productively. This one's one of my favorites because, of course, we feel the tension and we just ignore it until it turns into conflict. But if we notice it earlier, and instead of avoiding the challenge that comes with it, we use that tension as a clue, there might be something here to fuel growth. And the third is to shift from control to collaboration, moving from a directive leadership style to fostering an environment where all voices can be heard and considered. Often manufactures time for the leader because the team is stepping up, realizing they're welcome to bring more of themselves and contribute as a team. As a leader, what should you ask for from your coaches and from educators? Leadership development is always a partnership, and the very best coaching relationships are those where leaders take an active role in shaping their growth. Here's what I think leaders could ask for to have a more productive partnership. First, to have their coach or educator challenge your assumptions. A great coach won't just affirm your beliefs, they will help you to see beyond them. Because guess what? That belief is in your history. It might not match who you are now, today, in current time, let alone where you're going in the future. Ask your coaches and educators to help you develop your self awareness. Leaders can't effectively lead others until they understand themselves. Otherwise, they're going to be looking for themselves in those individuals and miss the gift that is unique and different about those team members. Next, focus your attention on deeper thinking. Coaching isn't just about action, but it's at its greatest value. It is about taking time to reflect and refine your leadership approach, learning to notice how you influence and impact others when you're speaking. What happens when you're not speaking? What are the ways in which you create more space for others and acknowledge when you are delighted by something you've heard, and also when it's a place for you to add and expand their awareness and therefore their contribution? The next is learn to support your emotional intelligence growth. I find that most leaders understand the value of empathy, and it's an easy concept to understand. It's a little bit harder to embrace and embody on a regular basis. However, learning to appreciate that someone is expressing an important emotion, they want you to understand, to see them, not fix them, not rescue them, maybe not even necessarily do anything, but be available to listen fully to what is being said. This becomes a focal point of a coaching relationship, that you get that experience with your coach and ultimately realize the value of emotional intelligence in any relationship you have. Next, encourage non dual thinking. When conversations with a coach or an educator can help you see beyond either or choices, as if there is only one right answer, which intellectually I know you know, there's always more than one right answer. The question is, will you give yourself permission to say yes, and this could also be true, and this could also be true? What will we see that brings those ideas all together? What is the solution that takes into account all that is occurring so that it is a holistic approach that fosters adaptability for the team and ultimately innovation? Coaching and education is designed to empower leaders to discover their own insights rather than delivering solutions. That's the leader's job. But partnering well with a generative coach or educator equips you to do that in a much more systemic way. Next, prioritize emotional intelligence as a foundation for your development. Because, of course, not only are you changing, your environment is changing, and your team members are changing. So it's not a one and done educational piece. Instead, it really is a capacity to build that you can use consistently. Of course, organizations that allow their leaders this opportunity to create a culture where wholeness and innovation are prioritized results in teams that experience more trust and more engagement. What does that do? The individuals on those teams feel more aligned with the mission, purpose, objectives, values of the organization, and they can be far more resilient when the inevitable change or curveball gets thrown their way. Leaders who are effective are the ones who can anticipate and be with their teams as those changes are occurring. Here's an example. One CEO found herself at a crossroads. She had to make a decision that would affect hundreds of employees. Instead of rushing, she sat with the tension of what it meant to have this number of people go away from her scope of responsibility. And as she reflected in that space, some new clarity emerged. She wasn't just focusing on the consequence of the decision, but she was also looking at, on the other side of this decision, when those 100 people are not here, what is the benefit to the company and the workforce that remains afterwards? What is the focus that would help her to recognize the people that will be picking up going forward, as well as to acknowledge and honor the people who would be leaving, because they had a part to play in the evolution of the organization? You see, a more holistic approach. Generative wholeness is more than a concept. It's a practice, a set of practices that creates lasting change at every level and the capacity to continuously adapt to change, maybe even sometimes invite it. In an individual, this means greater resilience and clarity and fulfillment in their leadership roles. For teams, we see greater engagement. Engagement is what leads to the trust necessary to collaborate, working on something that's never been done before. And for organizations, this ultimately shapes the culture to foster innovation as its character, and doing so reduces turnover because people are excited about the new possibilities and ultimately enhances performance. I think generative wholeness also works at a societal level. Ethical, purpose-driven leadership contributes to the greater good. When leaders and coaches embrace this approach, they cultivate a work environment where creativity is rewarded, which means vulnerability is rewarded. That means we're more open to deepen relationships and people feel truly valued. The shift from transactional alone to harmonizing in a transformational leadership approach has a compounding effect. It creates ripples that extend far beyond the workplace, where the great pride and fulfillment and satisfaction that the workforce feels at the office comes home to the family and to the communities that those companies operate in. So let's take a moment for you to explore your own leadership journey. I want to give you 3 powerful questions to ask yourself right now. If you have a piece of paper, you might grab it. Here's the first one. Where am I avoiding tension in my leadership? Where am I avoiding tension in my leadership? And what might I gain by engaging with it? All right, here's the second question. What leadership dynamics do I notice stop my team from growing? Here's a little hint. It might be a habit or a preference that you have and you're asking them to follow, only it doesn't quite fit for them. Or it might be a bias they hold and you recognize that they're too attached, and it's important to spend time with them to say, what's the evidence that supports that bias? The environment has changed and something else is true. It's very important to keep your finger on the pulse and notice these things that block them. This is one of my favorites. Who on my team or in my life might want more connection and more creation opportunities with me and from me rather than giving direction? Parents, you've seen this with your kids. And I've had many leaders who have said, oh my gosh, when I learned to be generative in my listening and in my questions, my kids seek me out now. And they're so grateful because I don't tell them what to do, but I give them the encouragement with a well listened to conversation to step into what they know is best for them. Here's the last question. If I could redefine my leadership, what are the top 3 traits that I would want to embody? As you take a moment and reflect on that, write a few things down. It's simply the first set of right answers. The most important leadership transformations begin with honest self-inquiry. Put it away. Go outside or go about the rest of your day. And maybe in the evening, after dinner, before you go to sleep, or if you prefer in the morning over a cup of coffee or tea, pull the list out again. Are these really the 3 traits that are most important to me? How are those showing up? How will they show up today if I was being deliberate and intentional about that? I know from direct experience, nearly 30 years now, that the ripple effects of being generative are massive. Individuals, teams, organizations, and society at large benefit from generative wholeness because it fosters people accepting responsibility for the influence they have on their life experience, fostering wholeness, team growth, creativity, and ultimately success, however you define that. Think back to your last conversation with a colleague or a subordinate or a peer that left you feeling a little frustrated, maybe even a little unheard and disconnected, maybe even disrespected. What made it difficult? What tension existed in that moment? Now, in light of what we've explored here, what if you viewed that moment as an opportunity instead of as a failure? What if, instead of avoiding the discomfort, you leaned into it with curiosity? It's so natural as a human being to want to move to judgment. Only we don't stop there. We go to judgmental, and our discomfort becomes somebody else as the cause. But it always takes 2 to dance the tango. So the question is of ourselves, what was the other person truly trying to express? And while it might have activated me to be frustrated, they wanted something and I missed that in my reaction. How might a generative approach have shifted that moment? One of the things that is so useful is learning to notice when the judgment surfaces and pause for a moment. Let me listen a little longer. And when we listen a little longer, a question surfaces, one that would allow us to learn something about the other person. My experience with leaders when they report using this is that 9 times out of 10, they hear something the second time they didn't hear the first time. And they realize they have more alignment than they have difference. And the conversation can continue in a respectful, collaborative way. Here's another angle on it as well, which is what feedback can you glean from that experience to create a better interaction next time, not only with that person, but the next time you feel tension, and feel how natural it is to transform that into curiosity. Leadership and coaching really aren't about having the answers. They're both about engaging with the questions that lead to deeper understanding and connection. The truth is, leadership isn't just about making decisions, and coaching isn't just about helping leaders achieve goals. It is about stepping into wholeness, about leading and coaching from a place of deep authenticity, the courage to say what you see, to be with people with this spirit of connection as an equal priority to the work that gets done. And so here's my question to you. Are you ready to move from tension to transformation, to invite generative wholeness into your leadership journey? If your answer is yes, comment below and with your responses to those assessment questions, and let's continue the conversation together about generative wholeness in your leadership pace.